Wednesday, September 20 edition of PFT PM. I have loosely committed to doing this once per week. I'm a creature of habit. I stick to my routines. I'm going to target 1 o'clock Eastern for taping every Wednesday during football season. That is the ideal time. We'll see how long I continue to do it. I went back and forth on whether or not I would do it, but last week we did the special edition of PFT PM based on the Jim Trotter lawsuit. I enjoyed it. You seem to enjoy it. So we'll see if we can go 2 for 2. I want to get started with this debate that continues to rage throughout the NFL. And it's not really a debate. And there's not even a debate as to whether there should be a debate. Players want to play on grass. The NFL wants to have the ability to decide case by case, stadium by stadium, owner by owner, whether to have turf or grass. The NFL would like to couch it as a debate, as an area where reasonable minds may differ, but it's not. And I keep comparing it to Thursday Night Football. There really is a difference of opinion among players. Some hate it. Richard Sherman called it a poop fest before, of course, he started to get paid by Thursday Night Football. Now, it is anything but a poop fest for him, which is fine, just fine. Some players hate it. Some players are fine with it because they get an easier work week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, not as intense of practice. They get the mini bye on the back end. They like it. That's a debate. That's a real debate, a genuine, authentic, organic debate among players as to whether they do or don't like short week football. But for grass versus turf, first of all, the NFL Players Association, which represents all players and is the players collectively, it has said repeatedly, grass, grass, grass. And I've been begging someone, anyone, any current player. I don't care about former players. Former players have different motivations. Former players have different ideas. Some former players just simply have the attitude of, hey, I did it, you should have to do it too. Some former players either have ownership interests or are trying to get ownership interest. Some former players are currently working for teams like Eli Manning. So there's a bias there. I want a current player, any current player, to say, you know what? I prefer playing on turf over grass because the commissioner says they're out there. The commissioner says some prefer it because it's faster, not because it's safer, because it's faster. Is it safer? The players believe it is. Now, what the NFL does to try to gaslight us into thinking there's a debate beyond claiming falsely, frankly, in all due respect, that many players want to play on turf over grass, they rely on the data, the data. Well, you know what? Data gets twisted and warped all the time. Data is just a different word for statistics. You can take statistics and change the variables and focus on this and focus on that and focus on that, and you can draw something out. You can make one specific factor that makes your position look good. It's like with Thursday Night Football. The NFL says the injury rate, no different on Sunday than it is on Thursday. If the injury rate's no different, there's no problem. We should be able to play short week football whenever we want. But that's just one piece of it. That's one piece. Who cares how many? Well, I mean, I care. But as it relates to whether or not there should be short week football, whether or not the same number of injuries happen on Sundays versus Mondays is just a piece of it. How many injured players who weren't able to play on Thursday could have played on Sunday? How ready are the players? Those are different factors. But if you reach into the data and you pick one specific thing, you can say, aha, the data supports our view. And the NFL's position is we need more data. We need more data on grass. We need more data on turf. We need more data on grass in December or January. We need more data on this. We need more data on that. We're looking for more data. We just want to make the field safer, and we're looking for more data before we can make the field safer. Meanwhile, you get every player who's spoken on the subject say, we want grass. Grass is safer. Give us grass. Sometimes the data needs to take a back seat to reality. The reality is the players want to play on grass. And I thought it was interesting that Matt LaFleur, the Packers coach, decided he was done talking about David Bakhtiari, who didn't play against the Falcons on Sunday on their turf field, lingering knee issue that happened not long after he got his major contract a couple of years ago. Bakhtiari has made it clear he doesn't want to play on turf, wants to play on grass. And LaFleur made it clear he don't want to talk about it anymore. At what point is a player just going to say, you know what, I'm not playing on turf? At what point is a player going to hold in when there's a turf game? Plays for a team that has its home games on grass, like the Packers. Doesn't want to play on turf. So when it's time to go to Detroit or Minnesota, injury, can't play. Time to play in Atlanta, turf field, can't play. Time to play at MetLife Stadium, injury, can't play. I don't know. Is that going to happen? Be a hell of a way to make your point. And I mean a good way, especially if you're on the fence, you're on the borderline. You know what? I'm kind of banged up, but if we were playing on this game on grass today, I'd feel pretty good about my ability to get through the game. But we're going out on this turf and it doesn't give. Your foot gets stuck. The forces bounce from your shoe back up into your body instead of being absorbed by the ground. Anyway, there isn't a real debate here. The NFL is trying to make it into a debate to delay and to diffuse the pressure, to come up with a way. And there's always a way if you have enough money and you're willing to spend it, to make all the fields high quality grass, not crappy grass. You know, some would say, well, I'd rather play on a consistent turf field than all these other wildly varying grass fields. We're not talking about some high school field. We're talking about spending the money for good grass fields. And I mentioned the Packers. Is it a surprise that the one team that has no real profit motive, because there's no one taking the profits away and buying super yachts or more planes? As someone recently said, how many planes can you have? The Packers, who have no oligarch who owns the team and siphons off profit for his or her own personal use, they've got the best grass field around. In Wisconsin, in January, if they can do it, anyone can do it. Oh, we can't do it indoors. If you got the money, you can. You come up with a way to do it. They don't want to do it. They'll do it for FIFA. Oh, FIFA. Oh, we're going to host World Cup. Oh, they want grass for that. Well, we'll work it out. Yes, yes, Mr. FIFA. Yes, yes, sir, Mr. FIFA. Whatever you want. So I don't know what's going to happen with this, but there's no real debate. And anyone who tries to tell you a debate is aligned with the interests that are trying to keep the players from getting what they believe they want and what they believe they need, which is grass. And if you truly care about the players as humans, and if you truly want to make their job as easy as it can be, because it's already tough, you get in line and get behind the idea that every field should be high quality grass. Next topic. We used to do the After Further Review segment on Wednesday editions of PFT Live in season. Chris Sims isn't doing Wednesdays this year, so we're going to confine any issues I may have, questions I may have, concerns I may have on the application of the rules to PFT PM. And I've just got one major point I want to make today as it relates to replay review. I feel like the entire officiating function, from the folks at the stadiums all the way to the ivory tower at 345 Park Avenue, where they decide whether or not plays will be overturned based upon the available visual evidence. I think everybody needs a reminder. When it's time to activate replay, you don't re-officiate the play with the benefit of slow motion. What do you think happened? That's not the standard. Hey, here's what they called at the game site. Hey, Joe, what do you think happened? It's not the standard. Never was the standard. We're not re-officiating the plays based upon what someone at 345 Park Avenue thinks. The standard, once the replay review is activated, and they've kind of embraced slowly the booth umpire idea where you've got somebody at the stadium who coordinates and collaborates with the officials on the field and can overturn decisions in real time. That's different. I'm talking about once the ruling on the field is made and it's subject to replay review, the standard, it used to be indisputable visual evidence. Remember that one? Now the standard is there clear and obvious evidence that the ruling on the field was wrong? The loose interpretation dating back to Mike Holmgren, I believe, will 50 drunks in a bar all agree that the ruling on the field was incorrect? That's the standard. And I'll give you an example. During today's PFT Live, we had a highlight from the Monday night game between the Saints and the Panthers. Michael Thomas catches a ball along the sideline. He lands butt first in bounds. The official right there, looking right at it, called it incomplete. That's the kind of play where the clear and obvious evidence standard, 50 drunks in a bar, see that replay and say, his butt landed in bounds. 1 cheek equals 2 feet. He's in. I mention this because there were 2 instances this weekend that surprised me. 2 primetime games. One, Sunday night. That final play, Mike Gesicki gets the pass from Mac Jones on 4th and 4, I believe it was. Patriots down 7 and driving. Gesicki tries to get to the first down, realizes that's going to happen, flips it back. Cole Strange catches it and barrels forward. And the officials on the field marked him beyond the line to gain. The ruling on the field was he made it, first down. Replay review, I believe. Now, if you're re-officiating the play, he didn't make it. If you're looking for clear and obvious 50 drunks in a bar evidence the ruling on the field was incorrect, hard to overturn the ruling on the field. It's hard to cross-reference, and it's not straight down the line. There's enough of a tilt. Clear and obvious. Is it clear and obvious the ruling on the field was wrong? Re-officiate it? Hey, he's short. Clear and obvious? Is it clear and obvious? Clear and obvious? I don't think so. Monday night, near the end of the first quarter, that sequence where Deshaun Watson's trying to get the first down and he fumbles, and they had this ridiculously long review. Remember when they would do the replay review in the old booth and they'd get under and it would go off after 90 seconds? And then that was it. If you didn't see clear and obvious evidence, or at the time, indisputable visual evidence within that 90 seconds, you're done. Good luck overturning it if you can't see the video anymore. At some point, they're looking at it for too long. At some point, it's taking too long. It necessarily is not clear or obvious if it obviously takes 5 minutes to figure out what you see. And I raise that one because at the end of the day, where's the evidence that the Steelers player made a clear recovery of the ball? He had the ball. He clearly had possession of it. But there is nothing in the visual evidence that shows the recovery clearly happening. That's the rule. Remember, it used to be, the ruling of a fumble could not be reviewed. There was the Ed Hockley play with Jay Cutler, I believe it was, and the Chargers some 16 years ago, where there was a pass that was a fumble. It was ruled a pass. They couldn't overturn it. They changed the rule to allow, if there's a clear recovery, if you pick up the ball and it's clear the defense got the ball, clear recovery, not clear possession after a scrum or whatever, clear evidence of recovery, then you could award the ball to the defense. It wasn't a clear recovery, clear and obvious. And this is the other thing that becomes, I think, to a viewer, concerning. For all of the various rules analysts out there, former referees who are in broadcast booths or connected to these broadcasts, anytime replay review is activated, I think it makes sense, and I guess I'm speaking to the producers of the games when I say this, have your rules analysts, anytime they're brought in during a replay review, say, well, remember, the standard for replay review is that the evidence must be clear and obvious to overturn the ruling on the field. It is a higher standard than what do we think happened? What would we do if we were officiating this play from scratch? No, it's got to be clear and obvious. We need to get back to that, or change the rule. Change the rule. Whatever the rule is, let's abide by it. And if it's going to stay clear and obvious, then we need to be thinking of the rule. We need to be mindful of the rule. And one thing that I think the folks who broadcast the games don't realize, they got a ton of influence over everybody. And if the folks who are broadcasting the games are hammering the point, whatever network, any network that broadcasts a game, if you're hammering the point of clear and obvious every time there's a replay review, that will have the effect of building the momentum to ensure that that's the standard that is applied. That no one gets caught up in, well, what do I think happened? No. Is it clear and obvious? 50 drunks in a bar, 50 drunks in a bar, 50 drunks in a bar. It just creates the kind of consistency the league is looking for. That's why they took the function out of the stadium some 10 years ago. They did it on an experimental basis, and then they did it on a permanent basis where someone at 345 Park Avenue makes that call. Now, it was set up for Dean Blandino, and then Dean Blandino took the money at Fox, and I don't blame him. As Blandino told me on the record a few years back, the NFL does not value that position of VP of football operations, which is a tactful way of saying they're cheap. What a shock. There's a common thread that goes through today's topics. The NFL is cheap. And I'm sorry if you don't like it, NFL. Don't be cheap. I won't call you cheap if you're not cheap. You see how that works? The labels that apply to anyone are based upon the reputation that they have earned. The NFL has a well-earned reputation for being cheap. So I will call you cheap for as long as you are cheap. When you cease being cheap, I'll stop calling you cheap. Next, this is another one that falls into the NFL is cheap category. And this one really bothers me as a former lawyer. I think back to, it was either 2011, 2012, when we were doing PFT Live as a streaming show at noon Eastern through NBCsports.com. I remember addressing a situation involving a fan at a baseball game who fell over a railing while trying to catch a home run or a foul ball or whatever and died. And again, as a former lawyer, one of the things you learn to do as a lawyer, and people like to complain about lawyers, but the efforts of lawyers to hold accountable those who would be cheap or negligent or reckless or irresponsible, to hold them accountable by taking action when that quality of not being willing to spend the money or not thinking about how to properly take care of people when you have a duty to take care of them, when that manifests itself in someone getting injured or killed and litigation ensues, smart companies, responsible companies will see that as a wake-up call, and they'll do what they have to do to eliminate that hazard moving forward. They'll spend the money and they'll complain about the lawyers. But at the end of the day, if you're keeping people from getting injured or killed, an admirable reaction to the situation. I raise that because something happened at the Dolphins-Patriots game on Sunday night. Police are investigating. There are reports suggesting that the 53-year-old man who had a medical event and was pronounced dead at a local hospital had been beaten up. There was a segment last night on NBC Nightly News, and the package had video of various fights, because we're all Big Brother. We've established that. Everybody's carrying around the phone that allows us to capture whatever's happening, and that's good, because otherwise you'd have no way of knowing, unless there's a security camera somewhere that catches it with that grainy black and white useless image. You know, these great cameras on here, high def, full color, you see exactly what happened. And my point is this, because the NFL had a statement that went something like, millions of fans go to games every week, or more than 1 million fans, something like that. It is a lot of fans. You figure there are 32 teams. If you got 16 stadiums with, 60, 70,000 in them each, I'll give you I'll round it up to 1 million. It's more than 1 million on most occasions. And it's a handful who harm the experience of other fans or something like that. A handful make the experience less enjoyable for other fans. Well, it's more than a handful that make it less enjoyable. Regardless of any physical altercations, there are a lot of assholes at these games, and they think it's their birthright to buy a bunch of booze, to get themselves fired up and loud and hostile. And God forbid, if you spot someone rooting for the wrong team and the game isn't going well, maybe you're losing some money on it, whatever. Those various factors combine into what can be a very toxic mess. So, and this gets back to how the law does, or at least should, affect these situations. You've got a concept under the law of an invitee. And there are three categories that relate to people who are on somebody else's land. Here, we're going to slip back into another CLE exercise. Three categories: trespasser, licensee, or invitee. Trespasser is somebody who's on your property that has no business whatsoever being there. They are owed the lowest standard of care by the owner of the property. They shouldn't be there. Licensee is somebody who's allowed to be there, but you're not benefiting from it as the owner of the property, right? You're allowing someone to be on your land for whatever reason, but you're not getting paid. You don't have any specific interest. You're just being nice. You have a standard that's higher than the standard that applies to a trespasser. Then there's the invitee. This is the customer. This is the person who goes to the grocery store and slips and falls on a banana peel and gets injured. There's a higher obligation. If there's a banana peel on the floor, it's incumbent on management to spot it and get it picked up. And if you don't, you're responsible for the ensuing injury. So I mention that because who are the people who come to NFL stadiums? They are invitees. And I'd hate to think that we've reached a point in our society where going to an NFL game is akin to going whitewater rafting or skiing down a black diamond slope, where there's a certain amount of risk that you assume that involves whether or not you're going to live to tell about. I think the idea that if you go to an NFL game, you take your life into your own hands is probably not where we should be. So it comes back to how much money is going to be devoted by the stadium owner / operator to protect the people who are there. And if somebody's getting punched and killed in your stadium, you probably need to have a little better security. And the argument will be, well, we're not responsible for the criminal acts of third parties. And that comes up all the time when you're talking about civil liability. But when you are the property owner and you have business invitees who are coming in to benefit you, to give you money, to be on your property, and you know, because you're selling beer and other alcoholic beverages are available based upon club seats and this, that, and the other thing, you understand, or you should understand, that there's an obligation to ensure a higher degree of safety and security. Now, what does it take? I don't know, more than what they had at Gillette Stadium. Anytime one of these things happen, what does it take? More, because there should be intervention before the punch is thrown. I don't know the answer to this, but my point is, when these things happen, the team is responsible. The owner and operator of the stadium is responsible, because whatever you're doing isn't enough to keep someone from getting punched in the head and possibly killed by someone else. So this is one of the reasons why you shouldn't be surprised if in the future stadiums are smaller. The upper deck, because I think this was a 300 level upper deck incident at Gillette Stadium. And when I was at Acrisure Stadium, I guess I should start calling it by the right name because that's what it is. When I was there for 5 hours, 6 hours on Monday night, and I kept seeing Acrisure Stadium, it kind of wiped the Heinz Field out of my brain. But you look up, because I had a moment where, you know, we had pretty good accommodations at the game. And as Chris and I joke from time to time, can't hide money in the Mike McDaniel PS to that, not trying to. But I looked up and I remembered the last time I was in that stadium, because it was for the 2004 AFC Championship game. And it was me and a few family members way up. And I'm looking, it's like way up. And you start looking around that up, and it's like a different country. It's like a different area code. I won't be surprised if some teams, for the next iteration of their stadiums, just peel that upper layer off, because they're not making as much profit per person from the upper layer as they do from the lower. And if it's creating these fights, these liability issues, why do it? Why have it? You don't need to have it. Your stadium's sold out. The blackout rule's dead anyway. All the money's coming from TV. The bulk of the money's coming from TV, as evidenced by the flexing on Thursday and Monday nights now. So I guess my point is this. Any injury is one injury too many at these games. Obviously, any death is one death too many at these games. And if people are getting injured by fights, it's incumbent on the owners and operators of the stadiums to find a way to intervene before it gets to that point, period. And if you can't do it, if you fail, you're responsible. Now, this last one doesn't necessarily continue with this trend of the NFL being cheap. This is the other end of the coin. This isn't the NFL is cheap narrative. This is the NFL is greedy narrative. And look, I understand that these topics today, and Wednesday's a good day to do this because we're caught between 2 weeks of football. We talk about the football aspects of things on PFT Live for 2 hours every morning. We write all the football stories at PFT. These are business issues that I find very interesting. And part of this goal is to get the NFL to live up to the standard they created with the John Facenda NFL Films videos that made me think that the NFL was larger than life. And all I'm doing, you created this monster back in 1972, NFL. All I'm doing is holding you to the standard that you led me to believe you live up to every day. So here we are with gambling. And here we are with the Rams down by 10 with 4 seconds left against the Panthers on Sunday. Not the Panthers, the 49ers. The Rams were 7.5-point underdogs to the 49ers on Sunday. 4 seconds left. There is no 10-point play in the rule book. They're at the 20 of the 49ers. So you got 3 choices. Well, you got 4 choices. 1, try to score a touchdown, throw it to the end zone. 2, just run the ball into the middle of the line and let that be the end of it. 3, take a knee. 4, trot out your kicker for a meaningless 38-yard field goal. Sean McVay, coach of the Rams, opted for D, kick the field goal, cover the spread. When it happened, I started getting texts from people. I know, what are the Rams doing? They're blatantly covering the spread. What are they doing? The spread's 7.5. They're kicking the field goal and they're covering. What in the world is going on here? It was a completely unnecessary play. It put the members of the field goal blocking team at some risk of injury. And look, Rob Gronkowski once suffered a broken arm that took a long time to heal, blocking on an extra point. So, unnecessary play. Just take a knee. You're down 10. You're still losing. Sean McVay was asked about it on Monday, and I don't want to be unfairly critical of the guy, but a lot of times you just I can relate. He just talks and talks and doesn't really say anything. All he had to say is net points are part of the tiebreaker calculation. Item 7 and item 8 are based on net points. The first one is net points in common games. The next one is net points in all games. Who knows? Maybe that 3 points is going to make a difference for us at some point. We can't assume it won't. There are still 15 games to play. And if we would end up not making the playoffs by 2 points or 1 point, that field goal that I hadn't kicked makes all the difference in the world. That's all he should have said. He had this convoluted explanation about, well, they were trying to kick a field goal and then onside kick and then score the touchdown. And, he wanted to protect Matthew Stafford from an unnecessary play. That's why he didn't throw it to the end zone. Okay, he doesn't care about his field goal team. He exposed them to an unnecessary play. And I've seen people argue, well, their kicker kind of has the yips, so they put him out there for the 38-yard field goal to let him build some confidence. Well, he knows that the game's not on the line. Like, when it's a 38-yard field goal and it's meaningless, you're less likely to screw it up than when the game is riding on it. So I keep coming back to, and because you're thinking, what's the solution? The solution is the NFL needs to just say, we make enough money from everything else. We don't need to stick our pockets, or as the case may be, our hands into the pockets of the sports books and pull out as much money as we can. We don't need to do that because it's impossible to reconcile taking as much money as you can from the sports books with having a game that is pristine and above any and all suspicion that something untoward is happening. That was the very argument the commissioner made 10 years ago when explaining why they were so adamant about opposing the spread of legalized sports betting. Normal incidents of the game will prompt speculation of point shaving, match fixing, etc. So when the NFL is officially sponsored by FanDuel and DraftKings and BetMGM and this one and that one, and they're just sucking as much money as they can out of the sports books, you walk right into it. You walk right into the very concern that your commissioner articulated in opposing it. And when the commissioner was interviewed by Mike Tirico a couple of weeks ago, prior to the first game of the season, he created this impression that the Supreme Court decision from 2018 forces the league to be in that space. It doesn't. It doesn't. It just creates a mechanism where a lot of people can legally make money from it, as opposed to the illegal way that a lot of people were making money from it in the past. It doesn't require the NFL to have sportsbook partnerships. It doesn't require the NFL to do anything to make money from it. The NFL chose to just embrace the reality, and at some point, the light bulb flickered. Hey, this thing we've fought against all these years, now we got a way to make some money from it. And hell, if they could have sold an official sponsorship to your local illegal bookie back in the day, maybe they would have done that. Once it became legal, all bets were off. And they rushed to the vault to make more money. So why do we have confusion about what players can and can't do? Why is there inconsistency in the rules that apply to non-players and players when it comes to gambling? It's hard to get a good foundation for promulgating your internal rules when the foundation is quicksand, because you are trying to reconcile that which cannot be reconciled. Making as much money as you possibly can from legalized sports betting while trying to legislate and moralize on what can and can't be done by those who work for the league, work for the teams, or play the game. It makes it very difficult, if not impossible, for those two things to mesh. And in a situation like this, where Sean McVay decides to kick the 3 points, you're going to have people who think that McVay was doing somebody a favor, that McVay was trying to help the Rams cover. And maybe the explanation is McVay was aware of the point spread, and just psychologically for his players, we covered. We didn't win, but we covered. We kept it within the number. We should feel good about our effort. They were supposed to win by 7.5. They won by 7. We were a half point better than they thought we were going to be. Let's use that as a building block to have a better season than maybe we would have had. Now, I guess that's a legitimate explanation, but it's a little too close to the flame. See, that's a problem. We're getting a little too close to the flame. And all it's going to take is one big scandal, and the NFL is going to have a problem. There's going to be congressional action. There could be prosecution. There could be regulation. And it potentially diminishes the game as we know it. I mean, maybe it makes the game better. I don't know. If the NFL isn't going to clean up some of these issues, maybe having an external body responsible for pro football is what we need. Maybe that's how we get things to the point where the John Facenda deification of the sport is justified. Maybe I should quit trying to help the league resist it, and maybe I should jump to the other side and say, hey, Congress, hey, federal government, hey, federal prosecutors, go after them, regulate them, because that's the only way to iron out some of these issues that threaten the integrity of the sport. So, and I know this, I'm able to track my traffic in real time, and the story about McVay's explanation, one of the top stories of the past 2 days, people know about it. How would they not? We're bombarded with ads for sports books now. We're hyper aware of it. And anytime something like that happens, and I think it's unprecedented. Somebody's trying to tell me the Vikings did the same thing Thursday night. No, they didn't. They scored a touchdown. They covered the spread, and they had time to recover an onside kick. You're down 10. The spread's 7.5. There's 4 seconds left. If you kick that field goal, that's the first thing anyone is going to think. And for Sean McVay to say he wasn't aware of it at all, I don't believe it. I'm sorry, and it's not personal to you, Sean. I don't believe anything most coaches say on the record, especially when their interest would suggest telling something other than the truth. All right, let's answer some questions. What do we got here? PFT PM Policy wants to know if I have watched the series Suits, and if so, do I like it? Was it accurate and how large of a burp? I haven't watched it, so I don't even need to read the rest of the question. I haven't watched it. I see that it's had this popular second life on Netflix recently. I haven't watched it, and I don't plan to. It's football season, and I have very limited time. My wife and I are watching The Bear on Hulu, which we both really enjoy, although it is frenetic and stressful. And it's hard to watch more than one episode at a time. There's a lot happening, and it's fast. And wait, what did he say? What did she say? Wind it back. What's that? Maybe we need to put the subtitles on. It's all happening very, very quickly, but it's a very good show based on what we've seen so far. I recommend it. 2 thumbs up from this guy. Okay. PFT PM Posse, does the NFL ever use mic'd up player audio for fines to confirm what they saw was intentional? Does it ever make players hesitant to be mic'd up? Players don't like being mic'd up. And I suspect they would use any evidence they could to come to their conclusions about whether or not there should be punishment. But as a practical matter, this all happens the day after the game. So do they even have access to it? Do they know? Can they turn it around? I don't know. I haven't heard of that ever happening, that someone relied upon NFL films, footage, or audio to help support a fine. But remember, Bountygate, Bobby, give me my money. Remember that? The sideline video, Anthony Hargrave, which I think Mary Jo White deliberately misrepresented. That was the moment that I started to become very skeptical about anything the NFL will tell us as it relates to these controversies. They lost me in that moment from 2012, month of June, when I kept watching that tape. And at Mary Jo White's insistence, it was Anthony Hargrave saying it. And you kept watching. It finally dawned on me. That was somebody else. That was somebody else who said that. And it undermined the narrative that she was selling on behalf of the league to get the media behind and to continue to stay behind the idea that these punishments against the players and against the Saints were justified at a time when that was a cultural issue throughout the NFL. They found one team that was doing it. They whacked them instead of saying to everyone, all right, new rules starting now. We're going to forget about the past. New rules start now. Anybody that does it is going to get whacked, and we're going to be watching. That's how the fines against the players ultimately end up getting tossed. But long story short, they'll use it when they need it, and they'll use it when it supports one of the things they're trying to do, especially if they're trying to throw the book at someone when maybe they shouldn't. Burst your bubble. Hey, we answered your question on PFT Live about the Chiefs over the Ravens in the power ranking, so I will defer to what I said earlier today. Ethan McNew, what's it going to take for the Rooneys to fire Matt Canada with everything going possibly wrong, with everything possible going wrong on offense? It seems inevitable to me that he needs to be let go and is simply wasting talent. I'm surprised it's been allowed to go on for this long. I had a take today on PFT Live that I'll summarize. And look, I'm glad you mentioned the Rooneys because I don't believe the head coach has the ability and authority to hire and fire his staff. I think it's an Art Rooney II decision ultimately. And it's a collaboration. And no one is trying to take credit and no one is trying to shift blame. When things go well, everybody gets credit. When things go poorly, everybody gets blamed. But the lack of offensive identity that traces, in my opinion, to the failure to fully embrace the skills and abilities of George Pickens, I can't help but wonder whether or not the Steelers fear George Pickens becoming so good and so valuable that they're going to have to pay him more money than they'd like to pay him. I mean, you're trying to win football games and pursue championships. You've got a great player who should be an integral part of the game plan and the attack every week. And I'm at that game Monday night, and you're able to see who's split. You get a better sense when you're at the game. I see George Pickens split far to the left, one guy on, safety's in the middle of the field. If George Pickens runs a go route and Kenny Pickett just throws it in the general vicinity, pretty good chance Pickens is going to catch it. He looked his way. Like, it wasn't until that 71-yard catch and runner just before that even looked his way. So I'm curious whether or not at some level they just don't want to create a contractual monster out of George Pickens, that they don't want him to be the centerpiece of the offense because they don't want to have to pay him a bunch of money, because their attitude is we can always find receivers. We'll let him go. We'll get another. Chase Claypool, trade him for a second-round pick, get somebody else. They've perfected the craft of scouting and picking receivers to the point where, we paid Antonio Brown a bunch of money and he was kind of a problem. We want to avoid that. We don't want that. We don't need that. I'm just curious about whether or not that factor is influencing this bizarre failure by the offensive coordinator, Matt Canada, to fully embrace what he has in George Pickens. James M., a.k.a. at Dr. J144. There's so much talk about Justin Fields, but when does Matt Eberflus get on the hot seat? He's 3-16 as a head coach, and they seem to be going nowhere fast this season. Well, they really did face a compelling decision after they earned the number 1 pick in the draft, because Justin Fields wasn't selected by the Ryan Poles, Matt Eberflus regime, but he played well enough last year that maybe it's smart to let it ride. I think this was on The Score earlier today. Was it The Score? Or maybe it was with Paul Allen, somewhere on radio today. I was explaining that, Justin Fields is that scratch-off lottery ticket where 2 squares are the $1 million prize, and you still got to scratch the 3rd square. And maybe not million, 500,000. And what do? Do you trade him and go with another unproven, completely unscratched lottery ticket at quarterback? Or do you just scratch that last square this year and hope that it works out? And if it doesn't, then you get a new quarterback. I think that's what they decided to do. They traded away the number 1 overall pick. They kept Justin Fields. They didn't take a quarterback, obviously. And I think that was smart. But now the challenge is, what can you get out of Justin Fields? And his comments from today to the media, kind of blaming the coaching. See, they're trying to coach him into something he isn't. They're trying to coach him into being more of a passer. He is one of the most dangerous running threats at the quarterback position we've ever seen. They're trying to take that out of him and make him into something he's not. He says he feels robotic. He just wants to go out and play. Now, it's better for his long-term career that he embrace more of a balance, because the legs are only going to take you so far. You need at some point to develop into a pocket passer, like Steve McNair and Steve Young did. Cam Newton just got to the point where he's done. He took too much of a beating early in his career and throughout his time with the Panthers. So you don't want to end up in that same boat. The Ravens are trying to do it with Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson's committed to it. So I don't know how this is going to go, but this is a critical year for Justin Fields. It feels like it's up or out for him in Chicago. Earn a second contract or you're going to be gone. And he's frustrated by the coaching that's trying to get him to go against his best skills and abilities, which includes roughly once per game, just taking off for a 60-yard touchdown. T-Fish, if the Commanders' offense plays too well, is there a chance Eric Bieniemy replaces Ron Rivera as head coach? That was something I threw out there to try to explain that awkward moment during camp where Ron Rivera felt compelled to share with the world that there were players who were concerned about Eric Bieniemy coaching them too hard. And that's when the light bulb first flickered that, if this offense performs really well and the Commanders are facing the prospect of losing Eric Bieniemy to another team, they might just say, time to move on from Ron Rivera and give the keys to Eric Bieniemy, like the Buccaneers did after Jameis Winston's first season. Lovie Smith out, Dirk Cutter bumped up because they were concerned Dirk Cutter was going to become the head coach somewhere else. Kind of an inside job. That's entirely possible. Now, not that Bieniemy would be directly involved in it. I don't think that Dirk Cutter was directly involved in it. And God forbid I made the mistake of asking him what he thought about the question that was being raised, because he still holds a grudge to me about that to this day. But the circumstances sure do suggest that the team decided, instead of losing this person who is getting the most out of our quarterback and having to start over with a new coordinator, let's just make him the head coach. So I think it's possible, depending upon how well the Commanders do this year on offense. And if their offense is really good and the team struggles, it makes it easier to just say Eric Bieniemy is the new head coach of the team. Pats Nation, thoughts on the city of Jacksonville being strongly against the new stadium proposal? Could we hear Jags to London or another city? Rumors to that effect starting in full force soon. Here's the reality. In most, if not all, NFL cities, if you put any stadium measure out to a vote, the vote is going to come back, we don't want the money that is otherwise the possession of the taxpayers to be used to build a stadium for the local billionaire who is already making millions and millions and millions and millions off of playing the games there. He or she can pay for it themselves. That's why for these things to work, what happens is they find a way to circumvent the electorate and the politicians who have already been elected and face accountability in theory at the ballot box. But how many times has there been a push to have people removed from office because, God forbid, they use public money to help build or renovate a stadium? That's the way it works. If it's ever on the ballot, you're going to lose. So it doesn't surprise me that the Jacksonville poll of people who aren't necessarily football fans would overwhelmingly be against giving $1 billion to the effort to renovate the stadium there. and much more in favor of just selling the stadium to the Jaguars and then letting Shad Khan, the owner of the team, pay for his own renovations. But I was surprised, but not surprised, to see that 47% of the people who responded to the poll said they don't want to spend $1 billion to renovate the stadium, even if it means losing the team. So unless they can come up with a way to do an end around beyond the ballot box with the politicians to get that money, they already have a stadium in London where they play one home game per year. At Burn Unit, why doesn't the league office do anything about the Rams pumping artificial crowd noise into SoFi? It is undeniable with undisputed evidence at this point. I don't know anything about that. But if it's happening, we've seen teams get punished for it in the past. Tom Marshall, also known as A Red Zona UK, can the Cardinals do anything to move on from Kyler Murray during their tanking season? It would have to be after the season. There would be some significant cap consequences, but I think that's part of what they're looking at. If they earn the opportunity to bring in a Caleb Williams, they very possibly might do to Kyler Murray what they did to Josh Rosen. And they did to Rosen after only 1 year. It's possible. Mike Lombardi has raised the idea that we're not even going to see Kyler Murray this year because there are guarantees that currently apply based on injury. They become fully guaranteed next year. It's a multiple $1 million figure. And we'll see if Kyler Murray plays. But hey, look, no team is going to go out and try to lose. They've played hard in both games. They could be 2-0. The question is whether or not the 2023 edition of the Cardinals are necessarily operating with one hand tied behind their back because they just aren't as good as they could be. They slapped together the quarterback position on the fly to start the season, but they have been competitive. Oh, boy, there's a bunch of questions today. Let me get a couple more. At Tyler Herger, why does the NFL not have a Tuesday night game instead of simultaneous Monday night games? Could flip TNFs from Thursday to Tuesday to give teams and players an extra day of rest, assuming their next game is on Sunday. Well, Thursday night football is not going anywhere. I think it's just a matter of time before they start scheduling games on Tuesday and Wednesday night, because you take a game out of the cluster of 1 o'clock Eastern games and you drop it into a primetime slot that's currently vacated. You get 20 million viewers, you make more money. It's a more valuable property that the NFL can sell. I think it's on the radar screen because we saw during the pandemic that they can do it. So I don't like the simultaneous Monday night games, and I really don't like this. And we talked about this on PFT Live. If I'm going to watch Saints-Panthers, I don't need to see what's going on Steelers-Browns. I don't need a split screen on ESPN. I got the technology. Everyone has it now. It used to be a big deal. I remember the first time I got a TV some 20 years ago where you could do a split screen and watch two things. Oh, that was fancy. And you could move it around. You could do the big screen with the little screen in the box and put it wherever you want. Nobody needs to have that pumped in anymore by the provider of the content. We can put up two screens if we want to watch both games. And what about somebody that prefers to watch all of both games, not know what happened, not want spoilers? So I'm, watching one of the games and they're showing me the last 30 seconds of the other game, and I want to watch all of it. I want to watch all of it. I want to go in fresh, like Frank Costanza into Firestorm. I want to go in fresh. I just don't like it. I tuned in to Saints-Panthers, not Browns-Steelers. Or I tuned into Browns-Steelers, not Saints-Panther. I don't understand why they're doing it, other than to just slap the total viewership together and pump their chest about how many millions of people watch Monday Night Football when it was a 5-hour ordeal instead of 3. Not that it's an ordeal, but you get what I mean. Hey, Red Zona UK, after your experience with the Wi-Fi on Monday, is it clear the NFL's focus on gambling is toward those viewing at home? Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, the experience on Monday night was awesome. Everyone we encountered connected to Acrisure Stadium was friendly and helpful. I didn't see any fans that were acting up. None of the handful of unruly fans that may have impaired the experiences of others at other games. I'm sure it happened. I mean, look, it's a night game. People were overserved. As we were getting back to the car, there were a couple puddles of stuff that you didn't want to step in that we had to navigate. But I thought it was a great experience. And it made me long for the ability to attend more games as a fan, which I know isn't going to happen as long as I'm doing this job. But I was surprised that the Wi-Fi got overwhelmed by the 67,000 in attendance, and the cellular network got overwhelmed. Now, there were times I could get a tweet through. There were times I could get a text through. But as the game went on, it got harder and harder. And I just was under the impression that they had the infrastructure in all of these stadiums to allow, even when they're at maximum capacity, ease of internet use, texting, tweeting, and ultimately betting one play at a time on what's happening in front of you. Amused to death. When will you and Chris stop calling the 49ers quarterbacks cursed? We all know it's not a curse, but over-aggressive play calling by Lord Shanahan. Blocking Hassan Reddick with a backup tight end, we all saw the result. Reddick also knocked out Josh Johnson in the same game. I mean, regardless, when you have that many injuries at the position, something's going on, whether it's incompetence by the coach or a curse. And it's just kind of fun to call it a curse because it feels like a curse. I've suggested they built Levi's Stadium on some sort of burial ground that was desecrated by the team and that this is the product of it. They have a great team at every other position, but they can't keep the quarterbacks healthy. Marvin wants to know whether or not there could be a union for all football players starting at 18 instead of just the NFLPA. It seems like agents for players and the college athletes are really winning their long-term careers. What do you unionize against, though? If they're not employees of their schools, you don't join the union until you're eligible for the NFL. So it's just, there are problems, there are issues, and unionizing college football players would be great if it could happen, but that's one of those things that the colleges will fight kicking and screaming. Our good friend Pauline wants to ask this question. Why am I still gutted by Aaron Rodgers being out? Still not over the disappointment, and I'm not a Jets fan. Is it just me? I mean, it's one of the big storylines of the season, and it's just gone 4 plays in. Like, one of the things that was going to carry us all the way through the regular season and into the postseason. Something that's interesting. What do I root for? I root for good stories. That was a great story, and it's just gone, just like that. I think it was Shefty trying to compare the Nick Chubb injury to the Aaron Rodgers injury, and look, they're both devastating for their team. The Nick Chubb injury is devastating for the team and for certain fantasy football players. The Aaron Rodgers injury is devastating to everyone. Great quarterback, one of his final years, New York, Hard Knocks, all the hype, all the attention. That was a major blow to the 2023 season. I think that's it for today. Almost a full hour. Okay. The plan continues to be every Wednesday, 1 o'clock Eastern, until I don't do it. And maybe, depending upon what happens on the Thursday night game, or if there's other news going into the weekend, and we don't get a chance to cover all of it during PFT Live, maybe, I'm not committing to anything yet, but maybe we'll have an end-of-week edition from time to time. Maybe. Definitely on Wednesday. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for your time. Check us out around the clock at profootballtalk.com, and we'll see you tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Eastern for an all-new edition of PFT Live. Have a great day. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.